Welcome to Signal Fire.
With the attack on Iran, the Trump administration has now started its second war of choice in just a few months. No vote in Congress, no clear, honest explanation the public can judge for itself. Just another war launched in our name with tens of billions of American dollars and American lives on the line. Because this White House can, and because it keeps the show interesting. At the same time, democracy is fighting for its life in Ukraine. A free Europe depends on Ukrainians holding the line. And after 4 years of war, U.S. military support has basically collapsed. Ukraine is being left to scrape by while Trump plays political games that help Vladimir Putin and leave Ukrainians facing another brutal winter under fire. Ask this administration what comes after Ayatollah Khamenei, and they say, that's not America's problem. Because Trump doesn't want real allies or real democracies. He wants client states, subservient, dependent on American money, careful never to cross the boss. If you play along, maybe you get protection. If you don't, we make you dead. That's the relationship Putin has with places like Belarus and the one he wants with Ukraine. And it's the model Trump is drifting toward for American power. But the thing about a protection racket is it only works until it doesn't. Your clients might pay you, but they never trust you, and they never forget. Right now, we're telling the world, not just Iran, not just Ukraine, the whole world, that America is a country to be feared, not respected, not trusted, not a partner, certainly not a friend. That story ends in a world that is more dangerous, more violent, and more chaotic for a generation or more. And in America that's more isolated, more resented, and less safe.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Signal Fire. I'm Lisa Senecal here with John Zieger. Great to see you, John.
Good to see you.
We're also joined by our guest today, Stuart Stevens, who is joining us from Ukraine. Stuart's a writer and political strategist. He helped elect countless, and you're going to wish I didn't say this, but he helped elect countless Republican members of Congress, senators, governors, and served on numerous presidential campaigns. I'm sorry. In 2015, this is where it gets better. He started speaking out about the dangers of Donald Trump and eventually committed himself to not only defeating Trump, but exposing the Republican Party for what it's become. He's the author of 9 books. The 2 most recent are The Conspiracy to End America, 5 Ways My Old Party is Driving Our Democracy to Autocracy, and It Was All a Lie, How the Republican Party Became Donald Trump. Today, Stuart's a contributor for Lincoln Square Media and a senior advisor to the Lincoln Project, and we are really excited to have you here today.
Longtime fan, first-time caller. Thanks for asking me.
Mentioned in the intro that you are in Ukraine right now. You're in Kyiv. You've been going back and forth on Ukraine aid missions since the full-scale invasion. Last time you were there in October, you said Kyiv didn't really feel like a besieged city. It felt like a thriving European capital until you went out for a run on the outskirts and saw 2 houses that weren't there anymore because they'd been hit by a drone. What does Kyiv feel like now in March 2026, 4 years in?
Yeah, it feels the same, except there's less power. I was just out getting a bite, and the power's out again. It's not really a problem now in a real, in any sort of tangible sense, because a lot of places have generators. But 10 days ago, it was minus 15 or 20 here. The coldest winter they'd had in over a decade. So that really was brutal. They're extraordinarily resilient. They had adapted. They set up warming spaces where people could go. But now, people out on the streets, it's just like a normal city. Occasionally an air raid siren goes off and no one seems to notice. So I would encourage everybody to come to Kyiv. It's in the summer, it must be amazing. Really, really, really beautiful.
When we set this up and we scheduled this conversation, we were looking forward to talking to you about Kyiv and about U.S. politics. And in the meantime, the United States launched a war
We're at war. Yeah.
So there's depending on who you ask, we may or may not be at war. But I think that even the president says that. So, at the same time, the U.S. has continued to kind of pull back from our support of Ukraine in pretty unhelpful ways. And I'm curious, like, what your sense is from on the ground, if you've had these conversations. How are people in Ukraine feeling about the U.S. sort of willingness to engage in this war of choice in Iran and yet pull back from supporting them?
Well, it's interesting because Zelensky's now engaged, offering to help these Gulf states with drone attacks. One of the ironies here, if irony is the right word, I'm not sure. When this is over and Ukraine wins, which Ukraine will win, it's the U.S. military that's going to need Ukraine. I mean, it's already true now. They have these Shahed drones that are flying around, blowing up U.S. embassies and stuff like this. And that's been going on here for like 4 years. And, they're very smart. They're very innovative. They're extraordinarily well educated. Nothing is more motivating probably than like trying to stop your house from getting blown up. And so, they've created a new form of warfare. And I've seen some of that. I was at a drone factory a couple of days ago. And, I think that there's a general sense of a sort of tired disappointment in the U.S. At the same time, I don't think there's many people in Ukraine thinking that they're going to lose this war because of that. They really don't have a choice. Russia hasn't had much success in this war, but the areas that they have taken over are slave states. They're incredible record of torture, murder, human trafficking, sexual abuse. And that's what all Ukraine would be like. So for them, and we talk about existential crises. I mean, this is an existential war. If they lose, they don't exist. It's really cut and dry. If the motivation for going to war in Iran is that it's a threat to the United States, what's happening in Ukraine is so much more of a threat to the United States in a global sense. That guy I worked for, Mitt Romney, did in 2012 say that Russia was our number one global economic foe or something.
Geopolitical? Yep.
Global political foe, right. And, it's proved to be extraordinarily prescient. I mean, that was before Georgia, before what happened in Syria, before the first invasion in Ukraine, and, of course, the full-scale invasion, before Russia was a factor in helping elect Donald Trump in 2016. I think Europeans, this is really an extraordinary transition for European states. I mean, the first week of the invasion, Germany offered to send 5,000 helmets, literally. And now I think, Charles Krauthammer had this phrase that he used that referred to a denial of the threat of the Soviet Union and Russia as a holiday from history. And I think that a lot of these European states have taken a holiday from history, and that's changed now. And there's a good case to be made that, or Russia that says it's at war with Europe. And they have all this asymmetrical warfare going on. It's very sobering. I mean, the world as we've known it was shaped by, obviously, the Pax Americana. The idea you can go to Paris and get in the car and drive to Warsaw just seems like no different than getting in a car in Indianapolis and driving to, Sacramento. But if Ukraine were to lose this war, that would no longer be possible. And, I drove down on this trip from Helsinki, which is a long drive, by the way, particularly in a vehicle that won't go over 100 kilometers an hour. But and so we spent a good bit of time in Poland and talking to people. They're very aware of this. I mean, you go to these Polish border towns with Russia and or border towns with Ukraine who did extraordinary things. So many of them taking Ukrainian refugees and opening up. But I think the Poles who have such a tragic history are very aware of what would happen if Russia were to win the war.
Being that close, that has to be a constant terrifying, or maybe you learn to live with that danger, but not lose the awareness of it.
Well, the Finns are the best example. I mean, they have the longest border with Russia, 900 miles. They never took a holiday from history. I mean, it's a country of 5.4 million, and they can, within 48 hours, they say, have a reserve army called up of 450,000.
That's amazing.
And I've been traveling with a Finn. I'm a great Finn fan. I'm not sure if there's a word for that, like francophile. Their history with Russia is so fresh, and they have stayed constantly alert. I mean, Helsinki, what you see of Helsinki is just a small part of Helsinki. Most of Helsinki exists underground. There's 300 kilometers of tunnels and underground fortresses that Helsinki is invested in. I was talking to this friend of mine I know from Ski World, a Finn, and I was asking, like, how serious are the Finns taking Russia? And he goes, well, my 64-year-old mother's book club is taking shooting lessons. That's a pretty good indicator. It is for Western civilization, basically, as we know it, that Ukrainians are fighting.
It's so clear why Ukraine is fighting. It is so unclear why we are now fighting in Iran. We have not had a case made for going to war, this, months-long effort, which is the normal, educating the public, trying to get people on board, having some conversations with Congress, discussing whether or not, they're going to authorize going to war is constitutionally the way this is supposed to work. But that seems incredibly easy for Trump to bypass because the Republicans don't seem to have any interest whatsoever. There may be two of them who want to have this open debate about whether or not we should have attacked a sovereign nation, especially one that we were in the middle of negotiations with that seemed to be going in the direction that Trump wanted. And I fear we struck when we did because he was going to get what he wanted, and then he was going to lose any pretense of a reason to do what he's done. Do you see any historical parallel for this with a party completely abdicating its responsibility? And is there any chance at all at this point? What is it going to take for the Republican Party, even, a critical mass of them in Congress, to stand up and speak out and take back their congressional authority as an equal branch of government?
As somebody who worked in the Republican Party for like a long time, too much of my life, I kind of had a going out of business sale for any optimism about the Republican Party. I think America needs a center-right party. And we don't have one now. I mean, the idea that Republican Party is a conservative party, I mean, we're nationalizing intel. If you look at what ICE is doing, it's basically the Alex Jones nightmare of what the left was going to do. They were going to have black helicopters. They were going to have this army of masked people going around breaking into homes without guns. I mean, to take your guns. And if you have a gun, they're going to shoot you, kill you. And, I don't really think there's been anything like this, certainly in American history. And it's most apparent or brought into focus when you look at their relationship with Russia. I mean, when I was drawn to the Republican Party, it was Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And the beating heart of the Republican Party was standing up to the Soviet Union, standing up against an expansive Russian Federation. And now the beating heart of the pro-Putin movement in American politics is the most conservative elements of the Republican Party. I mean, it's as if Churchill's party decided they were going to be pro-Nazi. I mean, we obviously have no idea what's going to happen in Iran. I think most of us have thought about it as long as Trump thought about it, which isn't very long. I do think there is you have to allow for a positive scenario. if the regime was deposed, and I mean, Iranian, it isn't arguably the most repressive regime in the world in any sort of scale, North Korea, but the odds of it having a positive outcome, I think, are very narrow. I mean, the history of World War II from both sides, Allied and German, on the impact, and Japanese and American, this idea that you can bomb a country into following your will or surrender is proven to be exactly opposite. And all it forces you to do is to keep escalating. So you start out trying to bomb ball bearing factories in Germany, and you end up with Dresden. And it still didn't end the war. So,
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I hope, I think everybody should hope it has a tremendously positive impact. But I think it's very doubtful.
You talk about the old Republican Party and the way that opposition to Soviet communism was a prime motivator, right? And that through line is all the way from Eisenhower up through Reagan and the elder Bush, and it had a kind of quality of a sort of noble alignment with American ideals of freedom, right? That was really, and so this wasn't merely because we didn't like having a powerful adversary. It was because we believed that freedom was a fundamental good in the world, and it was our duty to advance it, or at least prevent its retreat, right? Prevent the takeover of countries, which led to some real folly, the Vietnam War, lots of other adventurism.
Right.
But had a kind of fundamental sort of noble mission associated with it. Fast forward to today, and I guess my assessment, and I'd be interested in your take on this, is that the best way to explain the foreign policy of the Trump administration and the Republican Party, which is entirely in lockstep, is a kind of mafia foreign policy. It's a sort of what I think of as being closer to the way that that Putin would deal with Lukashenko in Belarus or something like that, right? It's like, you're my guy until you're not, and if you're not, I will make you dead, right? You will shoot yourself in the back 3 times, or you will fall off, you will fall over a railing. And so, we have Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela now, who is a Chavista, right, as implicated in all of the sort of bad stuff as Maduro was, but she knows the score, right, which is that we'll make her dead if she doesn't play ball, and it feels like that is sort of that's this kind of law of the jungle what would Don Corleone do is kind of the best way to understand this.
I think you've nailed it, John. I mean, Trump is open in his affection for strongmen. Kim Jong-un, that extraordinary spectacle of him sort of hugging on Kim Jong-un. The idea that you would invite Vladimir Putin to America and have American servicemen roll out a red carpet when he's involved in a genocidal war is just unimaginable.
Yeah, hasn't he put up his photo in the White House now?
Yeah. I mean, he congratulated him. I mean, it goes back to his first term at that, incredibly prophetic, even more troubling in retrospect than it was at the moment, meeting with Putin in Helsinki. I mean, when you look at it, I mean, one of the key elements of, you go back to Bolshevik propaganda about the United States is that America wasn't really a democracy, that we really didn't have elections, that it was a rigged system. And these are really just talking points of Trump and those that say that our election system isn't really a democracy. And the degree to which they repeat these talking points without realizing that they're talking points shows the success of the talking points. And, I've been not just disappointed in the Republican Party, and I'm interested in your take on this, John, but deeply disappointed in these segments of powerful segments of American life, like the tech industry, that have bowed to Donald Trump. And the thing that I would just say to, is like, do you want to be a CEO in Russia? Really?
Yeah.
I mean, does that sound like a good gig to you? Because you have it pretty good here. Like you might, have some trouble with like a board, but nobody's going to throw you out a window. And I think it's incredibly short-sighted.
The degree to which the tech industry in particular, but not exclusively, has succumbed to Trump and to a kind of naked embrace of corruption is pretty shocking. And I have my kind of theories on it. At the end of the day, I think one of the warping qualities of an industry that has become so valuable, and it's not just the quality of it being valuable, but it's value and speed, right? People can make multi-generational wealth, just absolutely wealth that the average person cannot imagine in very short periods of time in Silicon Valley, because for a whole bunch of reasons, going back to the financial crisis, it's really the only place in the economy. We've had very cheap money, and it's kind of the only place in the economy where you could get a lot of return. And so it's been flooded with money, which means valuations go up and all of this thing. But the consequence of all of that is that individual people can become vastly rich and through that wealth powerful, and people do not want to do anything that would put that in jeopardy. This week, probably, as we're talking, which is a few days after Anthropic pushing back on the AI company Anthropic pushing back on the Department of War, as we are to call it, the Department of Defense, as it legally is. And I think a shining example, of someone holding, at least to a limited but pretty important degree, to their conscience, but that's the exception, not the rule. So it is really hard.
And they will be rewarded for it, is my bet. In the
well,
same way
they already are.
Yeah.
Right. Their stock is going up. More people are subscribing to Anthropic and Claude, and people are fleeing from ChatGPT.
The same way
as they well should.
The brilliant Timothy Snyder's on tyranny, I think, is number one of his 40 points is do not obey in advance.
Yeah.
And, what really just strikes me, I mean, all these guys, but, you have this group of people who weirdly have a lot of South African connections. It seems like disproportionate to the amount of South African connected people there are in American life, who have gathered wealth in a way unimaginable in any other system. And this is, I mean, pre-tech, you go to other, and yet they seem hell-bent on changing the system as quickly as possible. I mean, you have Peter Thiel who says he doesn't believe in democracy. He's just open about it. And I mean, that just seems so weird to me. Instead of becoming a great defender of this system.
But there's an interesting thing that happened, and I think it's very related, which is every one of these folks who really makes it big. Well, okay, let's not say everyone, nearly everyone who really makes it big. They become very interested in life extension technology, biohacking, right. There, and there is a way that, and I can't tell you how many of these conversations I've had over the years where people feel like they, is some version of the Ann Richards quote, about George W. Bush being born on third base and thinking he hit a triple, right? They find themselves successful in one thing and think that they are sort of God's gift to the world, and really what sits next are immortality, right? Literally immortal. I mean, sort of Greek myth level kind of hubris, right? It's like immortality and a kind of power that transcends anything that normal people would think of as being related to politics or anything else, right? Which is why, why does Peter Thiel and Mark Zuckerberg and all of these folks, why do they have compounds in New Zealand, right, with underground bunkers and this kind of thing, right? Because they are not. It's actually, I'll get off this soapbox, but I find it so strange that anyone would look to an Elon Musk or really any of these figures who were present prominently at the inauguration as someone who should have an influence over American politics, because they are fundamentally transnational creatures. Yeah. They have no allegiance. Their country is wealth. It's not the United States. The United States is a flag of convenience for their wealth today. And if there were another flag of convenience, they would go to it immediately. That they have absolutely no allegiance to the United States.
I would recommend to everybody to read the great biography of Peter Thiel called The Contrarian. Not a lot has been written about Peter Thiel because he's so litigious.
It's disturbing.
And that book must have been, lawyered up like few books are, because he's never filed action against it. It's a fantastically crafted book, very funny, and incredibly disturbing. It has like one of the chapters comes from a conversation he had with one of Peter Thiel's grade school teachers, who described him as a very strange boy. And then it sort of all goes from there. Look, I have made the case, and I sort of half believe it, but I think I could argue it, at least to a draw, that the accidental wealth of PayPal has done more to tear the American fabric than the accidental wealth of cocaine did for Colombia. When you look at the history of PayPal, where they basically took the masthead of the Stanford Review, this kind of smart, kooky, right-wing publication that was in vogue at the time, kind of the Dartmouth Review, and brought them over to PayPal. They ultimately, when PayPal kind of became a real thing and people like Michael Mars got involved, they were like, why is the commentary editor of the Stanford Review our business manager? And they got other people. But when they left with tremendous wealth. Yeah. It sounds like a social experiment. Like, what if you took a really weird, kooky group of people who are very smart, but just weird, that don't really have values that are in sync with American mainstream, and gave them lots and lots and lots and lots of money? What would happen? The outcome is nothing good. I mean, Peter Thiel basically did elect J.D. Vance.
J.D. Vance.
Yeah. J.D. Vance is more likely to be president of the United States than anybody else walking around Earth right now, just statistically. And he did it for $16 million. That's a pretty good return on investment. That's how much he put in the PAC at the last minute so that he would win that divided Senate primary in Ohio.
There are so many deeply disappointing members of Congress that were not always deeply disappointing. There are a lot of members of Congress who are always deeply disappointing. And then there are the ones that at least professed to care about lifting up the middle class, about keeping America safe, about keeping Putin in check. So many things. And they abandoned these principles. And Rob Portman is right up there at the top of the list, though he, left the Senate. There are more millionaires in Congress now than in the history of Congress. Most of these people, when they leave, they're going to make more money than they are while they're there, even with the stock trading they're allowed to do. What is worth it? Being a member of Congress, being a congressperson or a senator, that makes it so unimaginable to not be there anymore, that they're willing to sacrifice their integrity, their legacies. I mean, there is just nothing that is going to dig them back out of the holes that a lot of these people are in now. And they went there willingly.
Well, given my history, it's a subject that I've spent more time thinking about than I would have liked to have. I find it extraordinarily perplexing. I mean, getting elected to the U.S. Senate is a real pain in the ass. I I mean, you have to do all these humiliating things, it's tiring, exhausting. And then finally you get elected so that you do what Donald Trump tells you to? I mean, really? Really? You went through all that? I worked for a guy who was the first and actually only Cuban-born American senator, Mel Martinez from Florida. Wonderful guy. Came over in the Pedro Pan airlift, didn't speak a word of English, ends up in the United States Senate. It's not bad. And I just remember vividly, he got elected, and 5 years into his term, he called me up one morning and said, I'm going to resign. And I'm like, why? I mean, you only have like a year left. You don't have to run. He goes, I just can't do this anymore. I can't wake up. I'm an adult. I can't wake up and do what Mitch McConnell tells me to do every day.
Wow.
I can't do it. And my wife hates me now. So she hates the person I'm becoming. So I'm going to resign. And he did. I think his life's been a lot happier since he resigned. And look, I think there's something that we did in the Republican Party without realizing it over decades, that we developed a system that rewarded compliance, that you rose by going along, by waiting your turn. And we punished individuality and punished divergent thought. And so you do this, it's like a genetic experiment. You do this for 50 years. You end up probably with these people that we have now. A lot of these people I know really well. I mean, I know John Thune since he was executive director of the Republican Party in South Dakota, a great guy. Everybody liked John. Super guy, good baseball player. Everybody liked him. I mean, a lot of these people literally wouldn't have let Donald Trump in their homes before. Yeah. And I know their spouses would.
Yeah.
John Cornyn.
Roger Wicker.
Roger Wicker. I mean, we're pages in Washington. John Cornyn. He's a perfect moral parable whose, fate is being decided as we speak in Texas in the primary election. But when I first met John Cornyn, he was a Supreme Court justice in Texas, which is an elected position, but it's not really a big deal to get. I mean, it's sort of everybody just kind of does it. So he was elected, and Karl Rove and I went to him, and really Karl, and said, should run for Attorney General. He thought, like, why would I do that? I have like a really interesting job. It's intellectually challenging. And so finally he decides to run for Attorney General. And so I'm doing the campaign. And, look, my job is to win. I wanted to make ads like about how he was going to be the toughest sheriff west of the Pecos. And he wouldn't let us do it. He was like, no. We do like white collar crime, like embezzlement. We don't like, the whole like chasing serial killer things. That's not really what the Attorney General does. It was like, okay. So, I mean, he had like, I said, well, if we don't do this, we might lose. He goes, I don't care, whatever. And from that, then he got elected to the Senate. And now had he stayed who John Cornyn was, he might be losing today, as he may very well lose, but he would have lost standing for something. I mean, the guy he's running against, Ken Paxton, is, he's a lunatic. He's a criminal. But he could very well win. And it goes to that. One of the principles of the Republican Party was don't negotiate with terrorists. Don't feed the alligator thinking he'll eat you last. And that's exactly what these Republicans have done. And one of the things that really just seems so odd to me is, most politicians have pretty big egos, which I mean, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, so do great athletes, musicians, God knows writers do. Why is it they can't see how they're going to be seen? Not in 50 years, but you were there, the second impeachment of Donald Trump. All you had to do was vote what the obvious vote was, and you didn't.
What do you think the mechanism is there? Maybe, maybe it's just too complicated to figure it out. I mean, I'm thinking about the McKay Coppins piece on Romney in the Senate, right? Where sort of eating alone, and which is kind of a bizarre thing to think, right? I mean, a person of vast accomplishment who, was a serious, was a Republican candidate for president, someone you have worked with and know well. And yet you have this kind of human dynamic of like, people don't like me very much right here. Like it's hard to make friends. It's lonely.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of that, right? People behave in ways that are influenced by those around them. I think for a lot of people, presumably not Mitt Romney, who's a very, obviously a very wealthy person, but for a lot of people, they're still young enough that they're gonna want to make some income after they leave the Senate, and so they want to be on the board of Exxon or Raytheon or wherever, and they're gonna want their Republican colleagues in the Senate to greet them in the cloakroom or in the Senate dining room or whatever. So they don't want to, so there's a little bit of that, of protecting future interest. Maybe it's just too damn boring to go back to whatever little town they still have a house in, and they really want to stay in Washington D.C. and be received at a nice party. What's your sense of what's the mechanism at work? Well, I don't really understand it.
My advice to him when he was talking about running for the Senate was like, why do you want to do this? Why do you want more Donald Trump in your life? But I think he felt really in a patriotic sense. And, I know, and he's talked about this, so I don't not breaking any confidences. He's been not unsuccessful in his life. He's a pretty good salesman. And, everybody who's ever worked with Mitt Romney at every aspect of his life thought it was a great experience. Everybody. He thought that he could put together a group of about 4 or 5 senators of both parties who would be a controlling swing vote. As he later said that to McKay, he failed. He couldn't do it. I mean, when I was, thinking about doing the Lincoln Project thing, I called him up and said, look, man, thinking about doing this, but I don't want your Republicans to blame you for me. And he just burst out laughing. He goes, you don't understand. I don't have any friends. It doesn't matter. The degree to which members of Congress and the Senate have family members who are lobbyists is something, that is not talked about enough. I think it's true of John Roberts. His wife isn't a lobbyist, but she works for a firm that recruits lawyers.
Yeah.
Which seems to me to be a basic conflict of interest. And there's no attempt to regulate that. And there should be. You should not be allowed to have any close family members who are lobbyists. I mean, it's just a fundamental conflict of interest. There's something that happens to these people, particularly in the Senate, where they get around themselves, and it's why they all start to speak in this sort of Senate jargon. They get along better with each other than they admit in public, both parties. As Al Franken famously said about Ted Cruz, I like Ted Cruz more than most people, and you have to understand I really hate Ted Cruz, which actually just shows that he actually sort of got along with Ted Cruz. But Ted Cruz is an incredibly unlikable human being, I will say, as someone who worked with him in the Bush campaign. And I think they just lose any sense of perspective. In part, that was the goal, to have them only run every 6 years. That they wouldn't be dependent upon having to get approval for everything they're going to do, that, elections are a long time. And there were senators that I worked for, like Richard Lugar from Indiana. Whenever Lugar would run for re-election, it was always shocking, how little people knew about Richard Lugar in Indiana, because, it had been 6 years since he ran. And, he was involved with, subjects like, nuclear disarmament with Sam Nunn,
right,
which wasn't exactly a hot topic issue around in Indiana. We reduced some nukes, in Belarus. But he was okay with that. That didn't bother him. It's a real corruption of public service. And I think what we're seeing in the Trump years is really the ultimate degradation of public service. My theory is that Trump appoints people like Hegseth, Kristi Noem, who, I was there in South Dakota when she was elected Miss Snow Queen, believe it or not. Didn't think I was seeing a future, national security of whom would defend the homeland. Idiots across the government, like RFK Jr. I think that he knows that they're idiots and fools, but he wants to prove to U.S. senators that I can make you vote for him. So the same way Saddam would make families pay for the bullet that killed, their family member that he assassinated or had executed. And, it's a Trump management style that he takes people and elevates them to a point that they never would have ever had any chance to have that position without Trump. So they're intensely loyal to him, which is, kind of a mob boss, again, management theory. Yep. You don't take people because of their strength, you take them because of their weakness. And then you elevate them. And Trump was always surrounded by these people like this. And he still is. And, one of the things people don't realize about this Trump world is, it's not like people like Stephen Miller or Steve Bannon or Jason Miller used to be our intern. It's not like they woke up in 2015 and decided they wanted to be involved in presidential politics. We would never let them in. I mean, Kellyanne Conway. I mean, it's like, no. Like, why would, I mean, these are people you wouldn't want to sit next to on a plane. You want to have, go through a presidential campaign with them? And then, Lewandowski is a perfect example. When Trump started running, he went up to New Hampshire and tried to recruit people. There's some really good political operatives in New Hampshire, just given the importance of and no Republican of any seriousness would work for him. They were all being recruited by the Jeb Bushes, the Marco Rubios, the Chris Christies, who were going to run, serious candidates. So he ended up with Lewandowski. And so now you have the spectacle of Lewandowski flying around and recently, purchased private jets with Kristi Noem, who, by all accounts is, they're involved in some romantic relationship. Lewandowski, I mean, here's a guy at a time when New Hampshire was desperate for police officers. He went through, they would recruit in big signs, join the police. He graduated from the New Hampshire Police Academy, and the only job he could get was a part-time Marine officer, which they call a puddle cop. And that was it, even though they desperately needed. I talked to one prominent Republican politician, who remained nameless, and he says, I know Lewandowski. I go, what? How do you know this guy? He goes, he approved my vote. Certified it. I said, well, did you like him? And he goes, well, he approved my vote.
It's one and only redeeming quality, I think.
These are important big positions. I think it's consistent with this phenomenon that politics for Trump is to embrace your worst self. That part of us that is aggrieved, that feels cheated, that wants to even the score. But you say what you will about Ronald Reagan, but in Reagan's view of America, to be born an American, you had won life's lottery. There was inequality in America, but you weren't disadvantaged because you were born an American. And in Trump's world, we're, as Americans, chumps and suckers. And there are these powerful forces out there like Canada that play this, we're being taken advantage of. Yeah. And it's such a different relationship to your government and to your citizenship. So, if you go back to this notion that, like with, Kennedy's example, the idea that we're aspired to something greater than ourselves, and that to be part of public service was an honor because you were doing some public good. And, this was always a problem with the Republican Party that we never resolved. And that is, that joke, sort of a joke, we laughed, that Reagan used to say, the most dangerous words in the English language are, I'm here from the federal government to help. But how do you resolve that around people that want to run the federal government? It's sort of like weird. And how do you relate to people whom the greatest opportunity they have to advance is due to the federal government, be it joining the military, being at the post office, being, as George Wallace was, a county judge. And that is a stepping stone up in life, civil service. And most of those people tend to be more disproportionately non-white. And it's part of the problems that, the Republican Party has had since Goldwater, appealing to African Americans. And we never resolved that. We never did the work of saying, like, why is it that overwhelmingly, African Americans reject us? Overwhelmingly, why is it that then Asian Americans? We didn't. Why is it that we have trouble expanding beyond our core white base, which was increasingly non-college educated whites? George Bush tried to struggle with this when he ran, which, you could make a case that in the 90s, 80s, the principles of the Republican Party, the linchpins, have been crime, welfare, taxes in the Soviet Union. So what happened under, in the 90s, right? Crime went way down. Taxes went down. Clinton ended welfare as we know it. It turns out being a different kind of Democrat was actually be kind of conservative. And the Soviet Union collapsed. So then what do you do to be a Republican? And George Bush struggled with this. And that's where he came up with this whole concept of compassionate conservatism. And, people forget, at the time, a lot of conservatives said to Bush, does that mean that you think that being an American conservative is not compassionate? And his answer basically was yes. So, there's a little parlor game among those of us that, work for Bush of what would he have been like if he hadn't been a wartime president. So the best indication is what he was like before he was a wartime president. It's not very long, like 8 months. And what was his signature piece of legislation was No Child Left Behind, which, I'm not a savant of education policy. I can't really tell you if it was a great idea or bad idea. But there's that famous picture of him signing it with Ted Kennedy over his right shoulder, which today would be presented like some sort of, war crimes tribunal. Like we have, evidence here, But that's how he had governed in Texas. He had a very powerful Democratic lieutenant governor, Bob Bullock. And it's just Bush's nature to get along with people, to want to get along. Who's his best friends? They're the Clinton and the Obamas, for Christ's sake. Yeah. You don't see him hanging out with any, these Trump people. And he was trying to evolve a new theory of what it would be. And, the chairman of the Republican Party, Ken Mehlman, went before the NAACP and apologized for the Southern strategy. We still failed at it. We didn't do any better. But I think at least admitting that we failed was a start. It never worked. Obama got elected and was such an extraordinary figure. McCain lost, Romney lost. It's an amazing thing to think about. On election day in 2012, Romney and Obama both had favorables of 50%. The night Mitt lost, we were tired, disappointed, but we didn't go to bed worried about the country.
Yeah. No, it's an incredible that change from 2016 to the present in terms of our outlook on the role of government, the role of the parties. Just like it's almost hard to convey it if you.
It's never been the difference between Romney and Trump. Yeah, I don't think we've ever seen such a difference. Now, I will say, look, when not to get off track, but when Romney was going through this long, as it turned out, process to get nominated, you could see the party wanting to go crazy. Who was he end up running against? Newt Gingrich. They wanted a moon station. Yeah. And I used to say to Mitt, there's actually some emails to this effect in that McKay Coppins book. Look, if the party's going to go crazy, we can't chase it. It's just going to go crazy. And, that means we're going to lose. You have to bet that the party's not going to go crazy. But you could feel it. And there was a group of non-college educated white voters that could have cared less what we were talking about. Russia or smaller government, they could have cared less. But you could see if you were going to go down this road that, Trump went down, Mexicans are rapists and all the racial stuff, they would wake up. Now, I would have bet, just in a political science sense, that if you did that what you gained at the lower end, you would lose at the upper end of college-educated Republicans, which is exactly what was happening with Trump right up until the Comey letter. And then just enough college-educated Republicans shifted. But, if you go back to that 16 primary, which is just extraordinary. I knew all these guys. They all beat up on each other because all they wanted to do was get one-on-one with Trump. Because the party wasn't going to nominate a guy that talked in public about dating his daughter. Let's don't be ridiculous. It's that inability to imagine Trump that I think has been one of his greatest strengths that we may very well be heading into again with how he's going to treat these upcoming elections.
I think what Trump figured out was he knew something about media and the ability to get attention, and he figured out something about psychology. I often think Chris Hedges wrote a book. This is now probably 15 years ago. War is a force that gives us meaning. I don't know if you
Yeah.
And I often think about if the Republican Party stood for being anti-communism and pro-free market and tough on crime, bringing crime rates down, all of these kinds of things. Well, those are not that, like, either they've been accomplished, crimes come down, the Soviet Union's not really a factor anymore, all of these things. So we have, I think, in modern life, in a lot of ways, a kind of crisis of meaning. And Trump imposes a kind of Manichaean good against evil, us against them, that gives people something to rally around. And even if it's all bullshit, and even if it's all flim flam, it gives people it gives them a little pep in their step. It gives them a little something to get excited about. We're on the right side. You're on the wrong side. And I kind of almost think the issue lies more in psychology than it does in politics.
I think it's true of what happened with Republicans, and it wasn't Democrats that did that. And I often think about this. People forget, but in 2004. Bush didn't declare victory on election night because Ohio, we still had enough provisional ballots out that if we knew he'd won, but if Kerry won 80% of them, theoretically he could carry Ohio, then he would have won the election. So we didn't do it. We ended up going out the next day to this weird thing at the RNC. But what would have happened if John Kerry had said, I won Ohio and I am president-elect of the United States? The Democratic Party would have taken his head off. They would have called for his resignation. The New York Times would have editorialized, the man has lost his mind. He should resign. And so what happened when Trump did that? All the Republican media, so-called right media went along with it. And all these senators, all they had to do was get their, and House, members, elected officials, get their comm shop to put out a statement congratulating the president-elect of the United States, which in the history of defending democracy is not exactly the toughest thing that's ever been challenged with. Nobody was asking him to take a beach or machine gun this. It's like, congratulations, president. And they all knew he won. I think what Trump understood, he looked at, the guy was always a Democrat, gave lots of money to the Democratic Party, maxed out Chuck Schumer, to him, it was sort of a class thing. He wanted to be with elite folks who at the time were more predominantly Democratic. And I don't think the whole character's super important to be an elected official really ever resonated with Trump. So, he was a Democrat. And he looked at the Republican Party and realized they really don't believe there's some feral animal instinct, like you're saying, he understood. If I give them power, they will do anything. They will go against everything they said they would. And he was right. And, it all hinged in that sort of 1 week period after Access Hollywood tape, when so many Republicans called for him to step aside and he didn't. And then the majority of them ended up falling in line. I mean, Rob Portman, who was, running for re-election to the Senate that year, said famously that he was going to vote for Mike Pence, not Donald Trump. And I said to him, Rob, how's that work? I don't know. I haven't seen that ballot. I thought they were kind of together. Really? How's that? I don't know. Just as, all these people that were saying the election was rigged in 20, they got elected on that. How is it that the top part of the ballot's rigged, but not the bottom? I don't get this. It's like some Venezuelan thing, I guess, maybe, it's very Putin-like, actually. When you think about how Putin corrupted, realize that there were so many leaders in Europe that were corrupt that, he could pull into his web.
I just want to ask one question about the media, because it's what John and I spend a tremendous amount of time thinking about and working on with Noodles that we're creating. The delta of what the press was like when you first got into politics, especially at the highest level of political reporters, versus where we were by 2012. with, I think a lot of the reporters who were on Mitt Romney's campaign grew into some really good reporters, but they were cub reporters. They were baby reporters when they had the Republican presidential nominee as their beat. How much has that change in political reporting, kind of the hollowing out, contributed to where we are now? And do you think that these independent creators and these independent media organizations that are forming have the ability to make up some of that experience, but rigor, that willingness to ask tough questions that a lot of people in media organizations now are either afraid to ask, or they've been told they can't ask, or they've been fired because they asked?
It's a great question. And there's a great book, Boys on the Bus, which Timothy Krause wrote about the 1972 campaign, the reporters. And one day in the Romney campaign, I'm a great fan of the book. I thought it's fantastic. And, some people in it, I always admired many of them. And some of them I later got to know and considered it a real sort of privilege to get to know them, the David Broders of the world. But I took a yellow pad and I divided in half, and I wrote on the left who was on the bus, and most of them were boys, and what were their backgrounds compared to who was on the Romney plane. And it was really interesting. A lot of the boys on the bus, some were non-college graduates. Very few of them had graduated from Ivy League schools. Maybe a third had been in the military. They had very different backgrounds. And then you looked at the ones on the Romney campaign. They were all like super smart, but they were all sort of hothouse plants. They gone to elite schools. And, I used to get asked a lot, do I think the press is biased? And my answer was no. I think it's a lack of life experience. And then covering a presidential campaign was the epitome of your career. This is what you built up to. So that meant that you had spent decades, like, starting out, at the cop shop, starting out at Albany and the State House. And I think there's either we believe experience helps and it develops judgment and develops sort of a rigorous process, or we don't. And that changed in part because of a lot of economic reasons. It's interesting, in the Bush campaign in 2000, we ran it out of Austin, and to cover Bush, you had to move to Austin. So who was more likely to move to Austin? They were younger reporters who didn't have families, less experienced. And then they got down to Austin, and we all hang out together and went out to, clubs every night. And there was a lot of people in the Gore campaign, and I don't really blame them, think that who covered Gore? They were the ones that stayed in Washington. At the end, Gore did this weird thing, moved his campaign to Nashville. But, they were much older, tougher reporters than the ones. Now, the ones who came and covered Bush became stars, in part because Bush won, which is another weird thing when you want the candidate you're going to cover to win. Because anyway, you take Frank Bruni, he turned into a great political reporter, but Frank had been a movie critic, theater critic for the Times. I can remember him like Stuart Stevens, like the Iowa caucus, they actually they go into like basements and it's like a show of hands. I was like, it's weird, man, but it's how it works. And, David Broder didn't ask that. The collapse of media as we've known it is a fact. And that's why I think Noodle is going to be such a huge asset. Whether or not we want it to be a different world, it is a different world. And we're not going to go back to this. And it's accelerating. The death of CNN is upon us. It's sort of like going bankrupt, slowly and then all at once. CBS, Bill Haley, the way that they created CBS, and talking about these tech titans, supposedly Bill Haley's last words were, "Why do I have to die?" Which sort of sums up, I think, why a lot of, these tech people taking it to the other level. Like, well, I don't have to, actually. That's an optional thing here. I think there's reason to be optimistic about it because our model of journalism was for the most part, a advertising-based model, which did have tensions. And, if you go back to the CBS, there was always that tension of is the news going to be separate? And, ultimately, the answer was no. When you look at these reporters, like Jim Acosta, who, was a great reporter in the Romney campaign, and now he's got his own following. And, he knew there were things at CNN that it didn't go with being a journalist. But, I think part of it also is this generation of journalists were raised that the greatest good was objectivity. That's based upon an assumption that both sides will have some ultimate efforts at good faith. And, you'd have tested to the extremes like in Vietnam, but ultimately would recenter. And then Trump comes along, and how do you tell both sides of a lie? And I think that model has failed. And a new model is emerging, but the need for facts to be a foundation of opinion has never been more important. And that's why I think Noodle is just, it's so desperately needed. And my bet is it's going to be a huge success because of that. I think people really want that. So thank you for doing what you're doing. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, and thanks for your thoughts, which we've had a number of great conversations over time, and have really been informative for us and shaped a lot of how we've thought about this problem. So we appreciate that, and we appreciate you doing this, particularly so late from Ukraine. Stuart, thank you. It's great to get your insights and thoughts, we hope you stay safe over there. People can follow you. You write for
Lincoln Square would be the place to find me.
And your social media is Stuart P. Stevens, pretty much across the board.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stuart. We appreciate you so much. Stay safe.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us again this week on Signal Fire. I'm Lisa Senecal, here with John Ziegler. We appreciate you liking, sharing, making sure this content and these conversations go far and wide. Please, if you are able, keep Ukraine top of mind. Keep it in your conversations with other people. And if you're able to support any of the many organizations that are doing incredible work on the ground, we'll list a couple of them in our show notes. Do what you can. Every little bit helps. It makes a tremendous difference. And it is not just Ukraine's fight. It is our fight as well. And better we do it now than we do it later. So thanks again for being here with us.